All right, so to begin with, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered here today on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and we would like to extend that respect to all First Nations people who are present here today. All right, so welcome to our panel here, Drawn to It, Animation, Illustration, and Art in Games. We are going to introduce ourselves. I am James O'Connor. I am the Game Development Executive here at the South Australian Film Corporation. I've spent the last few weeks sending a lot of emails to set all of this up, and I'm very happy to see so many people here today. I'm not an artist myself in the traditional sense. I doodle, but I do not know how to do any of the things that these great people are able to do. So we'll go down the line and introduce ourselves, and then after we've done some basic intros, we're going to show a few samples of the work of the people on this panel before we dig into some further discussion. So Bill, let's start with you.
Hello. Hi, I'm Bill. I'm an animation director and the co-founder of Half Giant, and we make trailers and cinematics for games.
I'm David. I'm the other founder of Half Giant.
I'm Dita. I'm an indie game developer. I'm exhibiting here at Sage. My game is The Troll and the Witch's House.
And I'm Jeremy. I'm the art director over at SMG. And I have a background in 2D, 3D, but no animation.
Excellent. Yes, Half Giant and The Troll in the Witch's House you can see on the show floor, and I would recommend checking them out. So we're going to run through a few clips. I believe the first thing we had was a reel from the team at Half Giant showing some of their work in animated trailers, and a large reason I want to do this panel is because I want to play this reel in a packed theatre, so let's run it. Also, there are plenty of seats scattered throughout if people want to try to find them. I see a lot of people standing on the sides. Wow. So how many people have played Cult of the Lamb here? Yep, quite a few people. And I'm not going to ask how many people bought it because of the trailer, but I'm just going to take it as a given that there's some. So Cult of the Lamb was sort of, as I recall, one of the big early projects that you took on, or am I misremembering your timeline here?
Yeah, that's correct. Before that, we did a trailer for a game called Boomerang Foo, which I think a lot of people would have heard of as well.
Yep, we play it religiously in our household.
Nice. The developer of that game is a mutual friend of ours, so we did that as a favor. And then he's friends with the development team for Cult of the Lamb, so it was word of mouth that led us to that. And the inspiration for starting our business, really, pivoting to providing animation solely for games.
Yep, fantastic. Let's move through all the slides and then we'll have a bit of a general discussion about all of our work. Dite, I would love to hear more about what we are looking at right now.
Right. So my background is doing design for animation. So prior to making my game, I worked with commercial studios, and doing that, I worked on some trailers for games like Brawl Stars or Clash Royale. So some of the work here is through doing promotions for those games. So there's like a Clashmas special for Clash Royale that a studio called Sun Creature did a couple years ago. And other than that, I've also worked in like TV shows. So this is an example from Cartoon Network where I was lucky enough to do a bit of character design for one of their shows called Elliot from Earth. Other than this, generally just working on a lot of like pitches for advertisements, games, and games too. So I've also done like some world development stuff that is NDA, so I can't show any of that. So a lot of like different sort of projects. So I would do like character design and style frames and stuff like that, just kind of depending on the client that we have. That's the sort of work that I do.
Sure thing. Whenever you're talking to animators and game developers, they always have so much cool work they're not technically allowed to tell you about, which is...
We'll never see the light of day, yeah.
If we could jump to Jeremy's slide. Great, so we have some projects here from you, Jeremy. I know that the work you're currently doing is under deep NDA, and I am under strict instructions not to ask about it, so let's dig into what we're looking at here.
So my work is kind of all over the place because I'm an art director, so I have roots in 2D, I have roots in 3D. I'd probably call myself a 3D generalist. The top 3 shots are from an indie game project that I got Screen Australia funding for back in 2012. And that was just something I was working on in my spare time while I was working in a little studio, and people seemed to like it, so I kind of developed it a little bit more and then pitched it to Screen Australia and then got some funding for it and was able to hire some amazing animators because, like I said, I'm not an animator. So I developed the characters and my sister wrote the story for that. And we brought it out, which was pretty fun. The bottom 3 are, so I do a lot of, whenever I want to practice any of my work, I feel like jumping around from, if I'm doing a lot of 2D stuff at work, I'll do a lot of 3D stuff in my own time. And so the bottom 3 are just personal projects. The one on the right hand side is a 2D concept by an Australian artist. I just really liked it, so I modeled up a 3D character of it. The middle one is a character that I created myself just for fun. I was learning Blender at the time, so I just thought I'd throw that together. And the last one is from, it's been cropped out, but that's by another 2D artist who's amazing. His name's Ido, and I can't pronounce his second name, but that's a bit of my work.
Wonderful. I would love to hear more from all of you about your pathways into the kind of work you're doing now. Sort of thinking back to the early parts of your career when you first started to work in art, animation, the various different disciplines you've all worked across. What were some of your first experiences doing this on a professional level? What did some of your first jobs look like, and were they outside of games? Start with you, Bill.
Why did I sit on this side? I'm always going to be first, aren't I? I can relate to coming from a generalist background. I'd say the same's true for me. I think one of my first jobs in the industry was creating e-learning applications in Flash, which involved a little bit of coding, a little bit of art, so I quite enjoyed that.
Just looking at the crowd to see if we have people who wouldn't know what Flash is, possibly.
If there's anybody here under 30.
And you just sort of kept building from there? Is that the...
So even when I was doing that stuff, I was very distracted by the art and animation side of building those applications. So I'd make them much prettier and more animated than they needed to be for a dry corporate application. And then, just followed that instinct, eventually moving into working in TV and then, eventually games.
Yep. What were some of the first TV projects you worked on, if you're allowed to say?
I worked on, an ABC Kids show called Figaro Faux, which was developed here in Adelaide, and then eventually went to series in Sydney, so I got to move over there to work on that, where I made a lot of great contacts. I did a lot of work for a studio called Flying Bark in Sydney until more recently.
I think we have a poster for Figaro Foe up on one of the walls out there somewhere. Great. David, how about you?
Yeah, I guess I started about the same time as Bill, working in Flash and web banners, like the unglamorous world of web banners, when that was a thing. And then from there I went to a company in Adelaide called Kojo. I was working as a 3D generalist, working on a lot of advertising and film work. So yeah, lots of like local advertising as well as some feature films, doing visual effects for that.
Yep. How did the two of you meet and start working together?
We both went to Hamilton College together, doing animation there.
Yep.
Yeah, that's where we studied.
Yep. And your styles just sort of fit well together. That was the...
From that course, we both got part-time work at this really weird studio. There was this guy who'd made a bunch of money in real estate, and he decided that he wanted to start a film business, so he did that. It was like a bricks and mortar location with a bunch of employees, including us, and we just sort of went there every day and went, what do we do? What are we here for? I don't understand. But he liked being in charge of his studio. We made a video about how to treat head lice. I think that's the only thing we made there.
You'd be surprised how many companies start because somebody accumulates too much money and gets bored. Dite, I'd love to hear more about where you got your start.
Yeah, so I went to a school in Denmark called the Animation Workshop, where I did not learn how to animate, but I did do 3D modeling, and the degree is like graphic arts. So I kind of always knew I wanted to do art. I quickly learned that like 3D wasn't really for me or what I enjoyed to do. So I focused my portfolio on doing like more 2D work and design work. And I was lucky enough to get an internship in London at a studio called Golden Wolf, where I worked for about 2 years, I reckon. And during those 2 years, I just got to work on so many different projects, so many different pitches, and I really got to like draw a bunch of different styles. And I really, really enjoyed that. And I did get to do like some world development for some games too. And yeah, so that was like my sort of start, was like straight into the animation industry. I always like had an interest in doing games. So like when I was a teenager, I did these like summer camps where we would do like game jams and stuff like that. And I always like just loved games. So I think first and foremost, like I just thought about the art and I just wanted to create art. I didn't really concern myself a lot with whether that was like for animation or for games specifically. Eventually I found my way to Australia and I moved to Adelaide in 2021. And during that time, I kind of had some gaps in, like I had gone freelance and I had some gaps in between work where I wasn't really doing anything, and I just wanted to like take advantage of that time and kind of work on my own stuff. So that's when I started like working on my game a little bit, and the idea, doing some design stuff, opening Unity, having a look at that, being very intimidated, but very lucky to have some very encouraging friends that kind of like pointed me in the right direction with like Unity plugins that make it a bit more accessible to script or coding when you don't know, programming language. So yeah, just kind of like got stuck into that and saw some potential in that and was encouraged to, apply for a Screen Australia fund. They have Emerging Game Makers Fund, and was very lucky to get that. So that kind of enabled me to kind of go full-time and focus on my game this past half year, where prior to that it had been kind of like sporadic in between work and so.
Yep. Have you found generally the skill set for developing a game with your own art? Have there been things about that have surprised you in terms of where those skill sets overlap, or?
Yeah, so my game is like obviously very 2D heavy. It's if you check it out, it's like everything is like hand drawn, hand animated. I kind of grew up on these sorts of like old point and click games like Freddy Fish or Putt Putt. And that's what kind of like got me into games back when I was a kid, and actually like how I learned to speak English because I'm Danish. So I kind of had to just work my way through that. That was like a massive inspiration for me. And obviously like when I was like, okay, I want to do a project on my own and for myself, this is like a chance for me to do all this like design work and create like quirky little characters exactly how I want and not what someone or a client wants, you know. So that was like how I got stuck into that. And, yeah.
And that game is The Troll in the Witch's House, which is on the show floor today. So definitely recommend checking it out. Jeremy, let's come to you.
Hey. Yeah, back in I'm a little old. So back in my day,
you're not that old, Jeremy.
I basically studied graphic design and multimedia at Swinburne back in Melbourne, and there didn't really seem to be any kind of courses that were specifically for games. So everyone told me that really the only pathway for a creative was to get into graphic design and build websites and build these kind of things. So that's what I did. I learned the multimedia course that I did a little bit of games, well, not so much games, but like very rudimentary 3D back in the day, which I really enjoyed, but there seemed to be no avenue for that. So I was a graphic designer for about 6 years, and similar to Bill, like I really enjoyed making things in Flash and, you know, animating things, and I was still drawing and illustrating for pleasure. And then one of my friends got a job as a UI artist at Tantalus in Melbourne, and he was like, "Why aren't you doing this? Like, why? These are your people. These games is where you need to be." And that switched something in my head. And from that point onwards, I was hyper-focused on getting into the games industry. So I quit my job. I went to AIE for a year, and I was very lucky after AIE to get a job at Chrome Studios. So that was my first gig, and that was a 3D environment artist. So I got to work on Star Wars games and Transformers games and all of the games that, you know, I ever dreamed of working. And yeah, that was how I managed to get into the games industry, which, yeah, I haven't regretted it since.
Fantastic. So you all came from slightly different directions and took different pathways. Bill and David, I'm interested about the first game work that you two did, and what that looked like, what brought you there, whether that was an ambition you had previously, or if games has adopted you rather than being something that you really want to get into.
Yeah, sure. So I left off the story when David and I had made the really good head lice video for the real estate man. But from then we found our footing, you know, working in visual effects, film, animation, started getting real work. We didn't work together for 10 or more years after that. David will tell his story, but I moved more into kids television. Probably a very formative experience in my career was working for a Sydney studio called Flying Bark. We were working on Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, another show called Lego Monkey Kid, and a lot of the skills I picked up working on those shows are the skills I use day to day at Half Giant. The reason we came back together was our mutual friend, the Boomerang Fu creator, approached me about doing the trailer for that game. I got David involved. David ended up doing pretty much the whole thing, and I didn't do much of it. But yeah, had such a great time doing that, and eventually it led to the Cult of the Lamb work, and we have just kept doing it.
Yeah. I know also, David, you did animation on Boomerang Fu, right? The game?
Yeah.
As well as the trailer?
I can't remember the timeline of like whether I had worked on Boomerang Fu before we started working on the trailer, or we made the trailer and then ended up working on the game. I think I was working as an animator on the game, so animating all of the characters. And that was through...
I disagree. I think it was... doesn't matter.
Yeah, I can't remember. It was a long time ago. But yeah, that was kind of like through our work in like the freelance world of animation and making like commercial work. I think Bill had worked with Paul, the designer of Boomerang Fu, who was a sound designer, and he did like music and sound for some of Bill's work. And I think Bill connected me to him, and I worked on the game, animating it. That was my first experience working on a game. And then we made the trailer, and yeah, it wasn't long before that was the only thing we were working on was games, and it's been amazing since. Like such a different industry from like film and commercials to working in games, and it feels like so collaborative and fun, and yeah.
Between doing traditional animation and doing animation for a game, and I imagine a few of you will be able to answer this, do those skills transfer cleanly, or is there a surprising number of differences to consider in animating for those different media?
It was a little bit of a learning curve, animating for games, and thankfully Paul, the developer of Boomerang Fu, was helpful in like getting me a copy of the game so I could actually test out the animations and learn what I was doing wrong. There's a lot of things that translated well, but a lot of new things I had to learn, like about how interactive things felt, and just like making sure like you push a button and you're straight into the motion instead of like any anticipation and stuff like that.
Yep. And Dita, have you had that experience working on your game as well?
So I actually never like worked as an animator.
Sure.
I only ever did design for animation. So animating for the game was more like, prior to that I had only really done like these sort of like short animation jams, I guess, with friends, where we would do these like little like scenes that would just loop with a lot of like looping animations, and I was just doing some little items and things happening in that scene, and that was really like the only thing, that was kind of like how I started to animate, just on my own, figuring it out. And then there's this thing called like Inktober, if you know that sort of trend, where people every October would do like inked artwork, and I kind of like strayed a little bit away from that. So I took the themes and like I would do these like looping black and white animations throughout like the whole month of October, and that was really honestly like the first time that I sat down and like animated, like really got into animating. So yeah, I don't really have any experience working on like client work per se. So for me, I feel like that's very sort of transferable. Like I'm basically just doing that for my game. You know, you click on items, trigger little like animations, or like doing the idle cycles for the characters, all looping. So it's a lot of that, which I really enjoy. Yeah.
Wonderful. Jeremy, not to say that you are old, but you have been in games for a while now, and you have worked at quite a few different studios in many different roles, and you would have worked with many different artists, many different animators. So I'm wondering if you would be able to tell us a little bit about some of the different roles and jobs that exist within game development for people who are maybe more artistically minded, who lean towards art and animation, what some of those roles look like, and maybe some jobs that people who are interested in all of this could be considering for their own career paths.
Yeah, sure. So I work with concept artists, animators, VFX artists, 3D artists, and it depends on the size of the team, really, to the specificity and like how specialized people are. The bigger the team and the bigger the game, you need more people to do very specific tasks. Whereas usually, you have like solo devs or devs with a couple of people. They usually wear quite a few hats. So yeah, as far as the creative roles in a game, and building a game from scratch, usually start with a small group of people, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you get more people into it. But at a core, there are usually concept artists that design the characters. So there's very specific people who are incredibly good at creating really fun characters, and then there are background 2D artists who do a lot of the background work. And then once those kind of go through the pipeline and get approved by people, then they move to the 3D artists if you're working on a 3D game. If you're working on a 2D game, then there's a lot more like passing that on to animators and things like that. And then, of course, things get layered on like VFX and sound and everything like that. But there's so many different avenues that, and it, as I said, it depends on the kind of game that you're making and things like that. But as far as the games that I've worked on, the largest games, we would even have people who just do facial texturing, for example, or like environment texturing. And some of the smaller games that I've worked on, there are one person who would do everything. They do the 2D concepts, and then they'd model them in 3D, they'd texture them themselves and all that kind of stuff. But the interesting part from games is you have this kind of division between the art team and the dev team, the programmers. And then there's an interesting middle ground, which is the tech artists, and they kind of live in the in-between, which is they need to work in the engine, but they also need to work with the artists as well. So I find working with tech artists really fascinating because they are
wizards.
Yes, they're black magic wizards. They basically take things that the artists do and make them look really good and make them work in the engine. So they know how to program. They know the art pipeline as well. So yeah, there's a huge spectrum of different skill sets, and I usually find tech artists as well are very much dabblers in everything and are really, really good at knowing the whole spectrum. Whereas, as I said, I'm not an animator. Whenever I give a character to an animator and then it comes back rigged and animated, there's also riggers as well. So there are people who you give the 3D models to. They will build a rig for that character, a very specific skeleton, so they can animate it, and then they prepare it for the animators to animate it. So there's another step between there as well. And the bigger the project, you can have people who just are facial riggers, for example. So if you're working on a really big game and they need a lot of facial animation, there are people who are just looking after that. So I once was talking to a person who was working on one of the Assassin's Creed games, and they had been just doing mocap cleanup on facial rigs for like 3 years, and they're like, I've forgotten everything else. All I know how to do is clean up mocap data. And I was just like, okay, that's pretty specific.
I remember hearing about an animator who worked on Batman Arkham Asylum, I believe, and they spent an entire year just working on the physics and animations for his cape. So that's what you can do if you're a big enough studio.
Cape animator. Yep.
Yeah. I've always wanted to track that guy down and find out what that year was like for him. Wonderful. Yes. I would like to come back to some of the work that Half Giant does. Stylized animated trailers for games are very popular. A lot of games are adopting that model for their marketing. And it's very interesting because in games marketing, if people make CGI trailers that are kind of close to what the game looks like, then they get accused of sort of manipulating the audience a little bit. But animation is very different from that because it's obviously stylized. And I am sort of curious about how this sort of works, your process when you are asked to do a trailer for maybe a game that isn't released or is still in development, and what goes into making sure that the animated trailer properly represents the spirit of what this game is going to be? Maybe that's a big question.
Yeah, that's a big question, but it's a good question. I feel like you're trying to do a gotcha question, trying to get me with like, sometimes the trailers don't look like the game. What do you have to say about that?
It's not what I'm trying to do, Bill.
I see through you. The way I explain it and the way we talk to clients about it too is that when you play a game, it's supposed to evoke a certain feeling in you, like it might be some really fast-paced game that's supposed to like get your anxiety up and get you all excited, or it might be like a cozy game where you're supposed to feel relaxed and zen playing this game. It can be hard to convey what you're going to experience in the game when you only have 30 seconds to show footage of it, and it's not interactive either. Like I can't play it when I'm watching it in a showcase. So if it's hard to evoke that feeling in your potential audience, the people you're trying to promote to, we can use cinema to try and do that faster. You know, like the language of cinema is passive, it's not interactive. The trailer is passive. So we can use animation to sell the vibe of the game faster.
Cool. Did you have anything you want to add, David?
Yeah, I guess one of the other things is like we try to talk to the client a lot and make sure that what we're seeing in the animation is what happens in the game. Like we don't want to give like the idea of you being able to do something that you actually can't do in the game. So even though it like might be represented differently, or we're showcasing more than one like game mechanic in one shot, which would take like multiple shots in gameplay, they're all stuff that does happen in the game. And yeah, another way of thinking like that we think about it is getting in close into the character's world, whereas like a lot of games, you feel that when you're playing it, but it's hard like watching it to feel like you're actually in the world because you're watching someone else play the game and you're not actually not in real time. So yeah, I think like actually getting down into the character's point of view. So a lot of games we work on are like top down. You feel pretty disconnected from the character, and we can like animate like what the characters are seeing and seeing the character from like eye level.
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. I would love to dig into some discussion around portfolios. What with this being an advice session, I imagine we have a lot of people in the crowd who I suspect, if we're at Sage, there's an interest in game development, and we're in the art and animation panel. Bill and David, I know that you bring in freelancers to work with quite often, and you all would have experience in putting together your own portfolios. So if we have people in the audience who know that they like games, they know that they like working in art or animation, or they're still sort of figuring that out, and they want to start building up a portfolio of work and figuring out what is important to them and what they want to do with these various interests that are boiling away inside of them. It's a more ominous way of phrasing it than I intended, but I would love any advice you would give to people in that position. We can start with Jeremy if you want. We can go down the other end if we...
Sure. When I'm looking at a portfolio, I think I'm looking for quite a bit of work. So not too much work. It's a really hard balance, obviously, because especially when you're starting out, I know that a lot of people, and including myself, you don't have a huge amount of work to put in a portfolio. So you're just putting everything that you do into the portfolio. So I think a portfolio as a living document, like it's as soon as you've created something, you want to keep evolving that. You don't want to keep it static. So for somebody who is looking at a portfolio, I want to be able to see recent work. It's not a static piece of a document of yourself. As far as expression is concerned, like there's a lot of portfolios out there that are quite static. They don't have a lot to say. I look for a bit more personal expression when I'm looking at things. I'm much more impressed with somebody who's taken something and maybe done something exciting with it or something more creative with it, and taken a chance on something rather than stayed safe in a portfolio. So that's what I look for.
Oh, keep coming down there.
Well, I'm not actually hiring anyone or have experience.
No, but you've built your own portfolio.
I have built my own portfolio. It's been a little while since I updated it. Basically, I guess like for me, I was applying to a lot of commercial studios when I first started, like for my internship and that. And a lot of the feedback that I got also from clients like later down the line has all been like a lot of variation of work if you want to work in animation anyways, and animation studios that do commercials. No one project looks the same or is the same. So I think, well, I know that what made my stuff stand out when I first got into the industry was the fact that I had like a pretty wide selection of different sort of projects that I've been working on, so that being, especially if you're looking for full-time where you are in a studio and you're like an asset that they have, it was a benefit to have someone that could work on like super stylized stuff, but also like within that, maybe more like edgy or realistic sort of brands. If one like that came in, it's like, oh, I can draw like cool stuff for Adidas shoes or whatever. It's not all just like characters and fun. It's all sorts of projects that come in. So I know that was like a benefit back then. Honestly, since then, I've gotten work through like word of mouth. So I actually haven't really like put in an effort to like keep my stuff super updated because I haven't had to. And especially not since like I made the focus to kind of do my own game this past year. I've just been focusing on that. So yeah, but I mean, if you want to get into advertisement and you want to have like a full-time gig, kind of, having, like you said, maybe not like a large amount of pieces, but the pieces that you have show maybe like a range and it's like high quality,
In terms of word of mouth and networking, I'm curious, is social media still important for this sort of thing? I know it's very hard to keep up with what is popular and what isn't in terms of how you get word out about your skills and show off your work and get people to come to you.
For sure, social media, is a big part of that. Like I have gotten work through an art director finding my Instagram and being like, that drawing there is like exactly what we're looking for this project. So again, I haven't really updated my social media in a while, but I have gotten work through that. So I think that's definitely like an asset. And other than that, like honestly, it's been like working on projects, especially freelance. Like some of the art directors that I would work with were also freelance. So I would get hired at one animation studio on a project, and then that art director or another designer that I worked with on that project would go to another studio for another project and be like, oh, I worked with Dita, she was really good at this. And that's kind of how, I got a lot of my work like that.
Awesome. And for you folks at Half Giant, I know you bring in freelancers sometimes. So things that stand out in a portfolio to you.
Yeah, I guess like before answering that question, I think like I'd go further into the word of mouth.
Yeah.
Like that's our most reliable source of finding artists is, especially as you get like more senior, is like just trusting that they've worked with someone that you've already worked with and they were good to work with and they like know what they're doing.
communication.
Yeah. Yeah, so as you get more senior, I think it becomes less about your portfolio and more about like the people, your network of connections that you've made along the way. But yeah, the advice you both had about like initial portfolios, I think I agree with. Just like one extra thing I would add would be like to make it clear what role you had in the project, if it was, especially if it's a professional projects, just like make it clear what you actually did on the project. A lot of reels we get, it's just like, I worked on all of these things, and it's like, well, like that's clearly a team of 10 people, like what part did you do on it? So yeah, making it clear what you did is also important. I can't remember what the question was there.
It was about things that stand out in a portfolio. Yes, it's...
Sorry to switch to a negative gear, but something that really stands out in a portfolio is the worst piece in the portfolio. It's only going to be as good as the worst thing that's in there. So short and sweet is good, just the best stuff. And the other thing I'd say is tailor your portfolio. Don't send the same portfolio to absolutely everybody. Different studios are looking for different things, and you can put that stuff forward.
Sure. We've got about 3 minutes left, so let's really speed round this last question. But imagining somebody who's just getting started out and they've got a bit of a sense that they want to be doing art, they want to be doing animation, illustration, something along those lines in games. If each of you were to say, if you want to do work similar to what I'm doing, the very first step would be X. And that could be downloading a specific tool to play with. It could be, going and working. I'm not going to answer it for you, I suppose, but let's start with Jeremy.
Yeah, I would definitely, like, there's so many tools that you can use these days, and that most of them are free. So I would highly recommend jumping on YouTube, looking at a whole bunch of tutorials, anything that resonates, whether it, VFX, animation, concept art. There's tons and tons of people just giving away their secrets for free, which is great. Unity and Unreal are free. They're both game engines. They've got, thousands of hours of tutorials online that you can get started with. So yeah, the door is wide open.
Yeah, so for getting into design work and that sort of stuff, there are so many, like you said, resources online. What I would do is that, if you enjoy some artist's work or whatever they worked on, I would really maybe focus on sort of what they have to say. With all the information, I feel like it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because there's so many people that have all these like sort of, this is what you need to do to get successful. But then like actually maybe question who they are and what their background is, because sorry, but there are a lot of like grifters online that are like, this is how you get good at animation. And then it's like, did you really even work on anything? Or are you just sitting and being like, this is character design 101, you know what I mean? Without like any sort of real experience behind it. So I would look at artists or people that you look up to and kind of what they have worked on, and then kind of focus on that. And honestly, it doesn't hurt to reach out if you have any sort of questions or advice. The worst thing that can happen is that they don't answer you because they're busy. But, there's like a lot of stuff online to point you in the direction of, getting into games and art.
I'm sorry, again, James, what was the question?
All right, you're giving somebody one piece of advice. If they want to be like you, they should do X first.
Oh. I might just pass that one on to Bill.
Thanks for that. I would say just follow your passion. Like, the only way to get good at this stuff is by doing a lot of it. And, if you're not having a good time, it's going to be hard to do a lot of it. If all you like drawing is Sonic the Hedgehog fan art, then goddamn it, be the best Sonic the Hedgehog fan art guy there is. And just make it clear when you apply for stuff, like, that this is what I do, this is what I'm passionate about, and I'm interested if you can find a spot for me doing this. and build your network too. Like, your path into the industry isn't going to be linear. It's never as simple as I've graduated a course and now I go get my first job. It's probably going to be something to do with I've collaborated with my classmates and I've made lots of friends and I'm aware of so-and-so who's doing this over here, and you keep your ear to the ground, and yeah.
Wonderful. That was all fantastic. We're not going to do a formal Q&A, but if anyone would like to come up afterwards and speak to any of our fantastic panelists, we can hang around for a bit. This has been great. Let's clap for our panel. All right, thank you. Wonderful to see so many people here. Go and enjoy the rest of the show. Make sure you check out Half Giant Stand and you go and play the Troll and the Witch's House and all the other games as well. Yes, go forth. Have a nice time. Thank you for coming.